Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now go to Mr. Foster, the ranking member of the Financial Institutions Monetary Policy Subcommittee.
Thank you. And just a quick comment. I think it's a mistake to imagine that you can completely hide from the macroeconomic effects of technology in your scenario planning. You know, we just talked briefly about healthcare costs. You know, obesity, half of our healthcare costs, and there are treatments in these GLP-1 receptor agonists that look like they're just a home run against obesity. And so these will be near-term impacts which will have macroeconomic effects. So just a comment. I hope you have a certain fraction of futurists in the room when you're talking about your scenario planning, because a lot of that future is like now. Okay, back to economics. So we have this historically low unemployment rate, 3.4%. And historically, this would be considered to drive runaway inflation. You know, your predecessor, Alan Greenspan, repeatedly referred to dangerously low levels of unemployment. And yet we see inflation is coming down. So what is going on here? How can we have these historically low levels of unemployment without having inflation take off? Isn't it possible that we simply have less frictional unemployment in our system, due perhaps to the fact that people get their new jobs online and have a job lined up before they quit?
So inflation is coming down, but it's very high is the thing. And some part, I've never said all of it or most of it, but some part of the high inflation that we're experiencing is very likely related to an extremely tight labor market. Wages affect prices and prices affect wages, so I do think that's part of it. More to your point, though, there was a time when there was a tight relationship between inflation and unemployment. In other words, the Phillips curve was steep, and that went away over the period of the Great Moderation. And really, in our thinking, that's because people came to expect 2% inflation, and we had 2% inflation, and then people just stopped focusing on inflation, and it stayed very low. So there was really no relationship, or very, very tiny relationship. We could have very weak economic growth or very strong economic growth, and we wouldn't have inflation respond very much. That was before the pandemic, though.
Okay. Well, I hope you don't overlearn, some of the lessons there. It's one of my worries that there have been a number of exogenous shocks to the system here, and it'll take a while to go through them. And if you want to be careful there. Now, in a related issue, when you say refer to the totality of factors, you're looking at a mixture of leading and lagging indicators when you look in this totality of factors. And my question, perhaps you might be paying too much attention to the lagging indicators and not enough to the leading indicators. The example that's referenced in your remarks and is in more detail in the report about the difference between using current rental payments versus the amount that you pay for a new rental contract, and difference in how much they lag. Had you paid more attention, for example, to the leading indicators like current rental contracts, then you probably would have picked up inflation earlier. You would have been, not gotten so far behind the curve on that. And secondly, there are policy implications going forward. If you look at current rental prices for new contracts, we're much farther along in fixing inflation, and that you can take your foot off the brake. And so what's your thinking on that, and whether you may perhaps be systematically not paying enough attention to leading indicators versus lagging ones?
So we've had our eyes on the whole housing inflation thing from the very beginning, and right now what I would say is that every forecaster is baking in lower rent increases. That's a big part of why people think inflation is going to come down in 2023. I think the thing with transitory was it more had to do with goods, and it had to do with the thought that these supply side disruptions would go away much quicker than they would, that the labor market disruptions would go away much quicker than they did. And in hindsight, it just took much longer for those disturbances to go away.
Yeah. So with hindsight, and if you allow yourself to Monday morning quarterback yourself, you probably would have gone up to 4% earlier, and not had such a big problem with inflation. And so, what is your are there structural things you can contemplate, or even after action reviews to say what would have happened if we would have paid more attention to the leading indicators, or improve the in engineering term, improve the bandwidth of your feedback regulator? that, this is something, if you want to get the best result, you need a high bandwidth feedback in the system, even when there's averaging on the back end.
So this is something we only think about during waking and sleeping hours, as you can imagine. It's really hard to know what the lessons are. Again, we really thought things would, nobody had seen the supply chains collapse. No one had seen labor force participation plummet. We didn't know, or unemployment go to 14% and higher than that, really. We didn't know how long it would take to go away. And I mean, if we ever see this pitch again, we'll know how to swing at it. But it's been
we'll now recognize
a bunch of firsts. Sorry.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman, his time has expired. We'll now go to the gentleman.